Police in London are under investigation after a video of a man's violent arrest went viral. It is the latest incident to prompt criticism and questions over the police's conduct. So how do we rebuild trust between communities and the police? Welcome to Roundtable. Hello from me, David Foster. Welcome to the programme. They are there to protect and to serve, but time and again we hear questions about the police and how they are viewed. Violent confrontations, well, thankfully, they are rare, but in many communities there is a persistent lack of trust.
Pictures of a man being restrained by police in East London sent social media alight this summer. The man appears to be suffering a seizure during a scuffle over parking his car. An investigation into those police officers is now underway. The incident reignited the debate about trust in the police. In the UK, the latest official figures suggest trust is improving. In 2014, 76% of people in England and Wales said they had confidence in their local police. By 2018, it was 78%. But campaigners are concerned that funding cuts could have an impact. A report by the UK Public Accounts Committee found that funding for policing is down by almost 1/5 since 2010 to 2011. And there are nearly 1/5 fewer officers and staff. Many young people say they are resorting to arming themselves in order to feel safe. Knife killings by under 18-year-olds rose by 77% from 2016 to 2018. With crime and policing issues having a real impact on the streets, how can confidence in the police be improved?
OK, let us introduce our guests. With me at the round table, we have Leroy Logan, former superintendent for London's Metropolitan Police. We have Rachida Sobhi, privacy campaigner and former police community officer, and Ken Hinds, chair of the Haringey Independent Stop and Search Monitoring Group in London. Great to have each one of you here. I've been looking at some figures about trust in the police, and it surprised me because actually the level of trust appears to be gradually increasing. So I'm suggesting to you that this is about perception, and as we know, perception is everything.
But I think that's a bit of a red herring, because if that's based on UK-wide, I maybe can understand that. But if it's based on London-wide figures, I'd be very surprised if that's the case, because I'm on the ground, and what I see is there's further alienation and distrust between BMA communities and the police.
What's the feeling over this side of the table?
Well, I'd agree, because obviously, as a police officer, I saw certain communities had a high trust and confidence based on the type of experience they had on day-to-day policing. But where you had heavy-handed policing, there was a lot of resentment. And I've seen that over the last 18 years with a charity I chair called Void Youth. And those young people always complain about being over-policed and underprotected. They feel like they're being disrespected and devalued whenever they are stopped by police, or the majority of the times. And as a result of that, they believe that the police are not there for them. They believe that they're not just a service, they're an occupying force.
Let's just go through some of these figures if we can, and each one of you can comment on them. But obviously, I'd like to hear from you first, Rachida. In 2017, 2018, 78% of people aged 16 or over said they had confidence in their police, up from 76% in 2013. In every one of the last 5 years, true enough, a lower percentage of black Caribbean people said they had confidence in their local police compared to British white people, but it has gone up. The figure for black people trusting the police, 70% in 2014, 76% in 2018. It's going like that. So perhaps this is just the chattering class on the street saying there's a bigger problem than there is.
Or perhaps it may be a system, yet again, designed by the senior leadership team within the Metropolitan Police Service as a whole. I know from my own experience, they designed a model whereby anybody who made contact with the police will then get what is known as a quality callback. So this is a mere question saying, did you, when you called, did you receive police response. Yes, and that goes down and gets noted as a positive feedback. So I'd be very cautious as to where the 70+ figure. Although I completely agree, if you were to go to the actual root of things, i.e. where the communities are, and you ask them, do they have any trust and confidence in their local bobbies? Yes, they do. And like me,
we should explain to people out there that the local bobby is the guy who is supposed to walk the street, chat to you, help you, give you advice. Not the heavily armed, bristling policemen with their sirens blaring.
They call them PCSO.
And beyond.
Police
your
communities.
Police constables, your local sergeants and so on and so forth that formed the safer neighbourhood teams that now we no longer have. And to really bring in my sort of argument into the aggression scene in the previous clip and so on and so forth, I'm coming in here today to quite simply introduce a broadened and balanced argument and debate around distrust and confidence in the police. After all, people like Leroy and I were out there, part of the system, and we gave up our day every day, sometimes not even knowing whether we're going to make it to see our kids or not.
I have thrown those figures out there just to put them in the mix. But the fact is, and I mentioned this, perception is everything.
It's everything. But,
isn't it? And what is the perception where you are? Haringey, relatively impoverished, would you say, North London borough?
Yes, well,
not as poor as it used to be.
It's got the poor side and it's got the rich side. So the poor side is what we call, it sees a police force. The rich side sees a police service. And what we see quite clearly on the poor side is that young people are getting further alienated from the police, and they're getting younger, and they're getting more brazen with that the discourtesy that they have against the police. I'll put it simply like this. If you ever watch a David Attenborough film, this is how it looks like on the street. You see the police rock up, and they stop someone, and they stop and search someone, and all of a sudden they're like the lions who's got a prey and they're eating their prey, and then the hyenas, which are young boys, come along and they start snapping at the lion and make them feel uncomfortable, and they run away. And so this is what the young boys are doing. They're really got.
But then that's the fault of the young boys and community leaders, perhaps such as yourself, for instilling or allowing it to be instilled that this disrespect can be shown. It's not necessarily the fault of the police. It's
simply this. It's the way that the police are conducting their stop and search engagement. Because what we're finding, they've got too many young police officers who hasn't got the kudos or the experience of that kind of dialogue and engagement, which what it does, it then further alienates that person who they're stopping and searching.
Can you blame the police in every instance here? Not specific ones, but is it always their fault and not the fault of the yobs and the violent protesters and the people who show no respect? I mean,
I blame the actual system, that is what my previous sergeant would refer to as those in the ivory towers, the decision makers. And sometimes we conflate and confuse the individual officer from the actual corrupt system that is inherently corrupt. And we know that, going back even to 200 years ago. The Met Police, from its foundation by the then Robert Peel, at the time, I believe he was both the Prime Minister, the local MP, as well as the Home Secretary. When he created the Met Police, it wasn't designed for them to take. They were given half an inch, an inch, and they took a mile,
which is where the
and they
phrase
continue to do that.
Why they're called bobbies, isn't it?
That's right. And the British public did not have any trust in them whatsoever.
No, because they thought it was a war on the poor.
That's right, and they were watching the revolution next door in France at the time. The Conservatives created the Met Police simply to dampen on any dissent.
But
we are
things
today,
did
200
change.
years
There was a certain level of respect and tolerance. And Ken, Leroy, when you came in 1983 into the force, how different was it compared to when you left the service?
Okay,
I'm asking you what changed.
Well, unfortunately, nothing massively changed leading up to when I joined, because, similar to Ken, we grew up with the sus law in the 60s and 70s.
Explain what that is
to
those
it was
of our viewers who don't understand.
The Met Police Act of 1866, which meant, through various assumptions, that they believed a person could be stopped who they believed was going to commit an offence.
Being suspicion.
Suspicion to commit an offence. So as a result of that, there was all sorts of assumptions that improved when they brought in the Police and Criminal Evidence Act in 1984 and brought in codes of conduct around how you conduct a stop and search and how someone is dealt with if they're arrested in a police station going right up to the court system. So that's started to put a lot of structure, because before then, people could be detained under the sus law and kept in sometimes for days and go before the courts, and they could get a custodial sentence. I had relatives, cousins and friends who were subject to that, and they actually left this country because they lacked the system. Now, those systemic failures, as already been said, from almost 200 years ago, is still here today.
But I'm asking really, what happened, what's changed between 1983? Because we're talking about mistrust today.
No, the mistrust
is it a continued mistrust,
I'm
or
trying
is
to
it
give
a
you the
new?
journey. So you then had, of course, the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, and
Young
two
black
other colleagues,
teenager murdered.
and the McPherson report that came out of it. And myself and two other colleagues gave evidence to say that the police service was institutionally racist because of those systemic failures, not only externally in terms of stop and search and Section 60 roadblocks, etc., but it's also about the internal resistance for people of black and minority ethnic backgrounds to go up the ranks. So you saw them hugging the lower ranks and not advancing up the organisation. These systemic failures have not changed. And as a result of that, you are seeing certain people being emboldened within the organisation, just like they are in the community in terms of Brexit, because we've seen hate crime go through the ceiling with Brexit. It's emboldened them. And as a result of that, remember, police are a reflection of the community. They seem to give that perception, and people are not trusting. And one last thing.
But have things got worse, Leroy? This is what I'm asking.
Well, I think it has, because young people don't even trust officers to stop and search them and get a stop slip. Much less they're going to do a survey, a public attitude survey. They don't trust the police, so they don't even participate in that.
Is some of this down to the fact that, since 2010, police funding's been cut by 20%, police numbers have gone down by 20%?
No, because at the same time, you've had the decimation of youth centres and the monies around young people's welfare, and you had other things that's impacted on the community, disproportionately, particularly where parents are no longer able to chastise their children and feel that they can't put their hands on approach again. Yes, you had some cases that was excessive, but when they feel disempowered, the parents feel disempowered, then what can they do? But personally, just getting back to that, the sus, because that was a racist law. And then the 1984 brought in PACE, which was supposed to...
Police and criminal evidence.
Which supposed to come out from that. But if you're basing something on a racist law, it's not surprising that we're still here in 2019, still are talking about disproportionality.
Okay, so a phrase that cropped up in our conversation with you before the programme was a normalisation of aggression when it comes to the police. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think in a lot of ways we are seeing it in society, that the normalisation of violence, where people used to have disagreements and not resort to violence, seems to be less and less. We've seen that the flight and freeze aspects of encounters is decreasing and more around flight. So as a result of that, you start to see it normalised. You see it in social media, which has been a real accelerant. And as a result of that, people develop feuds. So if Ken and myself had a bit of a disagreement 20 years ago, it would be contained in a little peer group.
Yeah.
Now, social media, I might wait, and Ken gives me a bit of a hiding. I wake up in the morning, my few friends say, are you going to let Ken get away with that? All on social media. Everyone can see it.
But that's not the police's fault, is it? It's a societal thing.
Absolutely. But I think the police needs to be cognizant of all of those adverse child experiences, toxic stress, and wider community trauma, so that they have a trauma-informed approach and how they deal with the young people.
You were in trouble with the law at a young age.
At 17.
How old are you now?
I'm 60 now. Under the sus law.
You're 60?
60.
Goodness gracious. So 43 years ago, how do you think your treatment by the police, bearing in mind what Leroy has just said, would have changed from 43 years ago to a young black person today?
Well, to me, I don't believe much change has happened. As I said, I got my first criminal conviction at the age of 17 under the sus law, not even committing an offence. It just took 2 police officers to come to the magistrate court and said that I was about to do something, and I ended up spending 6 weeks. For the next 15 years, I got deeper into the criminal justice system. And just to say now, I'm one of their top advisors around stop and search and engagement. But yet, I still find myself being caught up in a net.
Do you recognise what Leroy is saying,
as
though?
short as last year.
That society has changed, and that makes these confrontations that much more difficult to resolve because of social media and other aspects, that perhaps it might have been more difficult for you in 2019 than it was 43 years ago.
What I can say in regards to that is just simply that the police cannot arrest their way out of this matter here. We have to have people like myself who are community game changers, community leaders, to step up and to actually...
And you're doing this with Band of Brothers?
We're doing it with Band of Brothers. We're doing it under Haringey Community Against Violence, where we go into these hotspot areas and stop confrontation escalating to violence. The police admit that they can't do that. But if we work together with the police, we will get better outcomes.
Let me try one last time on this one. More difficult today than it was when you first got in trouble?
What's more difficult?
I don't know. Is it more difficult to avoid trouble because of the social media aspect that Leroy was talking about?
It's more challenging.
Right.
And because, don't forget, so long as I don't take it personal or make it personal, then I will have that level-headed way of bypassing the potential fallout from having a disagreement.
Another phrase that came up, Leroy, in your interview before the programme was culturally informed officers, a lack of. Now, that is vital, isn't it? People who are attuned to the locality, to the people they're dealing with on a daily basis.
What a beautiful lip service sentence.
Why doesn't it happen?
That is. A lot of this I've heard, inside the Met Police.
Is that nonsense?
Outside.
You don't need that.
It's a lot of, individual officers is what I'm about, judging and giving merit to. Not the system. I think we've already established that. The system itself is inherently corrupt. And unless we focus on that, if you know what I mean, we keep focusing on the, individual officer, we risk, quite simply, allowing the corrupt system to get away with murder, and they have so far.
You've had a long-standing...
I have had my own story. I was personally fitted up with a crime.
Exactly.
I didn't even commit
I
while
don't
I
want
was...
to go into
silence me as a whistleblower, but no,
But
this
you
is
did
not
do
about
that
the
on a
topic.
previous programme we had.
A book is on its way, but suffice to say, genuinely...
What about
Can I just say,
please.
I totally agree that there are systemic failures. Absolutely. But one of the things, again, we try to, with the Stephen Lawrence inquiry and the McPherson report, is to have a more reflective organisation. The more reflective, not only just police services, but other organisations, the more efficient and effective they are. And also, there is an inextricable link between how you treat your diverse personnel and how you serve the needs of a diverse community. And let me just land with this. If the community see that the organisation, police service, does not treat their diverse personnel right, and you start to see the employment tribunals and civil actions, all they're going to say, well, actually, that's not an organisation for me.
But I'm going to stop you here for just a minute, Rachida. But you said earlier in the programme it was a problem that too many black and minority ethnic officers within the police force were kept in the lower levels.
Absolutely.
And yet now you're saying what you need is more officers at that level to mix with black and minority ethnic communities.
No, listen to what I said. I said it's how you treat it. It's not just about the numbers. You want to have it more reflective, absolutely, to look like London. At the moment, it's actually reducing because it's now about 13%, but London is getting over 50% minority ethnic community. So they're getting worse at that, getting the officers in, and more importantly, they're not keeping them because the way in which the hostile environment of the culture means that an officer is 4 to 5 times more likely to leave the organisation in their first 2 years than their white counterparts.
And that indeed is true, and I have contributed towards the actual recruitment of BAME officers, if you like, and to sum it up and add to what Leroy is actually saying here, referring to you can employ as many black ethnic minority officers as you like. I was one of them. But the retention of those officers is almost none. Some of us are either being horrendously mistreated and leave, resign, or end up with, mental health issues that really means that we can't carry out our jobs. And in reflection of Stephen Lawrence's case and PACE of 1984,
Yeah.
I will sum it up as this, David. 25 years on after Stephen Lawrence, and all we have with the Met Police, which is the only service I can speak on, is positive discrimination. That is quite simply another term of lip service saying that we now can discriminate as we wish against those who are of
All right.
certain
So
ethnic
we've talked
backgrounds.
about those people who are, for whatever reason they believe, unfairly targeted perhaps on the streets by the police. We've talked about discrimination within the police force itself. Let's talk about the public here, because their number one priority when it comes to policing, when they were questioned, was terrorism. Number two, child exploitation. Number three, violent crime. So resources are being diverted to what is a major threat of our time, that number one priority, anti-terrorism.
But I think the key thing you have to realise, you can't do any of those things in isolation. You have to have the community. There's a direct link between getting intelligence and information from a community and trust and confidence. If they trust you, they're going to talk to you. So you can deal with the terrorism, the child exploitation, the violent crime. One of the things that concerns me is a direct correlation of that, is how the number of murders that's being solved. In 4 or 5 years ago, you had 90% of murders being solved. It's less than 60% now because
Here's
people
another
are not
figure,
talking
Leroy.
to them.
Under 9% of all recorded offences now result in the culprits being charged or summoned to court.
Absolutely. So, so if you think about it, some people are thinking, well, actually, if someone stabs or shoots me, they've got a good chance of getting away with it. So listen, I've got to arm myself up and go with my brand of bros on my street or into negativeness because they make me feel secure. Police are not in the numbers or haven't got that cultural confidence to really make them feel
How do you
secure.
change all this?
The way
We only have 5 minutes.
Okay, the way I'm changing,
Yeah.
the way that Haringey's changed this, Haringey Community Against Violence, as I said, we're working with independent of the police, but with the police, and we're agreeing on the hotspot, the flashpoint areas where you're finding most kind of trouble happening, and we go in there, and I said we stop confrontation turning to violence. We also hold regular meetings with senior police officers to tell them about what our expectation as a community is of the service that they need to provide.
And, okay, number one, when you tell them that, what is your main priority?
The main priority is about keeping professional, staying professional. The second thing is about the aggression, only if it's absolutely necessary. The third thing is the use of handcuffs. And the fourth thing is that when you stop in a youngster under the age of 17, no further action should be a get out of jail card. When you've got reasons to stop them, we've got to find out what is going on in that young person's life that attract them to the police officer so that we can nip it in the bud rather than making them get hardened criminals.
You see, we come round to this, don't we? Are police there to maintain law and order, which to some extent I think is what you're saying? Or are they there to catch the villains, the ne'er-do-wells, the bad people on the street? And that perhaps is where the lack of trust comes from, because they are doing that rather than maintaining law and order.
If they're actually dealing with the right sort of people, if they're arresting the right people, stopping the right sort of people, everyone is happy. Because no one is saying don't stop and search and not or arrest people. They're saying it has to be intelligence-based. It can't be stereotyped. It can't be made assumptions. And it's got to be objective with independent oversight, which is right across the organisation. And that's when we start to see improvement with the Lawrence recommendations of the McPherson report. They had external oversight. In fact, they had central government scrutiny when the Stephen Lawrence steering group was chaired by Jack Straw and other Home Secretaries.
I'm getting the sense that things haven't necessarily got worse in the last year, but they've just never improved.
They're not going to improve, again, unless that sort of, accountability and transparency are there. So many times we've seen case and case again where police aggression and brutality, which is deplorable in my book, regardless of the recent incident where the man was initially in the wrong, but it's the police officer's aggression that was then to become on the spotlights. So to send out a green light from the senior level to the lower level frontline officers saying, yeah, you can go ahead and bash people about,
That's the
without
golden
using
bit that I
proportionality.
worry about.
Every officer at Handon is trained, as Leroy would say, on a numeric, everything is abbreviated, right, known as PLAN, that stands for proportionate. Any action you take should be proportionate, legal, accountable and necessary. Where is this training going? Why is this not being seen in the police public dealings on a daily basis?
Well, I tell you what, I wish we could talk for a great deal longer, but what might be very interesting is to get a number of people from the police services, perhaps those that you're actually helping to give advice to, bring everybody here and say, listen, it's not just the public that perhaps feel they have a problem, but the police themselves feel that they are misrepresented.
Yes.
So we'll try and do that on another roundtable. Listen, thank you very much indeed. Leroy, Rachida, Rough Diamond, as you like to be known on the streets of Haringey, but Ken Hinds, thank you very much indeed. And thank you for watching. I'm David Foster from me and the Roundtable team. I hope to have your company on another occasion, but for now, goodbye.